The sun had just begun its slow descent, scattering gold and rose across the clouds over the Midwest. Flight 417 cut through the sky, a silver bird glinting in the fading light, gliding over cornfields that stretched like patchwork quilts below. Inside, the hum of air conditioning mingled with soft chatter, the quiet drone of engines lulling passengers into a comfortable rhythm. Some flipped through magazines, others scrolled on phones. Bobbies cried softly in the distance, quickly soothed by weary parents. Laughter bubbled quietly from a group of teenagers huddled near the back, playing cards on a fold-down tray. It was a picture of normalcy, mundane and unremarkable, a Friday evening flight, nothing extraordinary to the eye. Except in seat 24A, an 11-year-old girl named Emily Carter noticed the subtle things adults didn't. The faint vibration of the wing against the sky, the hum of the engine, the slight pull as the plane adjusted altitude. She had learned to listen, not just to voices or music, but to the subtle symphony of flight itself. Her father had been an Air Force engineer, and even after he passed 2 years ago, his lessons echoed in her mind. She often imagined herself in the cockpit beside him, reading gauges and dials, memorizing the way machines breathed and responded. Today, she had brought her notebook, sketched small diagrams of the flight path, and was quietly taking notes about the clouds outside. Her mother, sitting next to her, thought it was just a harmless quirk. The cabin lights dimmed, as they often did during the cruising portion of flights, casting passengers in a gentle twilight. The scent of recycled air and faint coffee lingered. Flight attendants moved with practiced ease, pushing carts of snacks and drinks, exchanging smiles and polite jokes. No one noticed the subtle tremor at first, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration running through the fuselage. It was something only someone attuned to the plane would detect. Emily did. Her brow furrowed as she set down her pen. Something felt off, not terrifying, yet but wrong enough to grab her attention. She looked out the window at the endless sky and tilted her head, listening for the telltale hum of the engines. And then it came, a metallic bang, sharp and echoing like a gunshot muffled by distance. It reverberated through the cabin, rattling the plastic tray tables and vibrating the drink carts. A collective stir rippled among passengers. Conversation stopped mid-word. Eyes darted to the ceiling, searching for explanation. Flight attendants froze, their practiced smiles faltering. The first instinct of most people was to dismiss it. A plane is supposed to rattle sometimes, isn't it? But for Emily, trained by countless nights of simulations and bedtime lessons with her dad, this was different. She could feel it in her bones. The plane was not merely rattling. It was wounded. She looked around as if expecting someone else to see what she saw in the instruments inside her mind. No one did. Then came the second warning, a subtle lurch, almost like the plane had tripped midair. Drinks wobbled precariously on trays, a few spilling over, the sound sharp and echoing in the hushed cabin. A mother grabbed her child tightly. An elderly man muttered a prayer under his breath. Emily's mother felt her own pulse spike, reaching instinctively to grab Emily's hand. But Emily pulled slightly away, her eyes fixed toward the cockpit door. No one noticed her expression or the calm clarity behind it. Most adults were frozen by fear. She was already calculating. In her mind, she saw the gauges, the airspeed, the pressure, the angle of the wings, the engine's RPM. Something had failed. Not a full catastrophe yet, but enough to set a chain in motion. Enough to make the next moments critical. A sharp warning bell sounded, almost swallowed by the roar of the plane shifting in the sky. Passengers gasped, clinging to armrests and each other. Emily felt the plane tilt slightly to the left, a dangerous lean at cruising altitude. Flight attendants gripped overhead bins and seats to steady themselves. Panic was a quiet shadow at first, then it began to spread like wildfire. A teenage boy yelled, "What's happening?" The words barely had time to leave his mouth before the next shudder hit, harder this time, throwing him against the seat in front of him. "Stay calm, stay calm," one attendant tried to shout, though her own voice trembled. Another screamed into the intercom, "Cabin crew, secure the cabin. Passengers remain seated." But calm was a fragile veneer cracking under the weight of reality. Bags slid across the aisle, a soda can tipped and rolled, pinging like a warning bell. Somewhere near the back, someone cried out, and the echo of fear seemed to resonate with the very walls of the plane. Emily's mother grabbed her once more, pulling her close. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice broke. "We'll be fine, it's fine." Emily's fingers dug into her mother's hand, not out of fear but to anchor herself. Her mind was racing, cataloging everything she had learned. Engine failure procedures, the critical checklists, the stalling dynamics. She knew what most adults didn't. And she knew that if the pilots missed just one key step, the next 10 minutes could decide life or death for everyone on board. The overhead lights flickered as if echoing the rising tension. The hum of the single-functioning engine was louder now, irregular, almost frantic. Oxygen masks had not yet deployed, but the pressure in the cabin felt uneven. Emily could sense the subtle change in air currents, the slight dip in altitude, the tension in the metal beneath her. Her stomach tightened, not with fear but recognition. She knew this scenario. She had practiced it 1,000 times in her mind. A sudden shudder shook the plane violently. A coffee cup flew from the cart, crashing to the floor, shattering in a spray of brown liquid. Screams erupted. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, clipped, professional, but tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Emily barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the cockpit door, heart racing, mind already running the procedures that would follow in reality, not simulation. They might not have time. They might not get it right. She made a decision in a heartbeat that would change everything. She would have to act. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She couldn't be. The plane tilted sharply to the right this time, throwing some passengers into the aisle. Bags tumbled, a suitcase burst open, spilling clothes like confetti across the floor. The captain's voice, now strained, came over again. "We're declaring an emergency." Panic erupted. Phones were whipped out, prayers were whispered into screens as loved ones were called. And in that maelstrom, Emily's gaze remained steady, her hands clenched in determination. She could see the fear and confusion in the eyes around her, but she could also see the chance to make a difference. She wasn't just thinking about herself, or even her mother. She was thinking about 283 lives suspended above the earth, caught in a fragile bubble of metal and air. Her father's lessons surged through her memory like a lifeline. She knew what she had to do. And then, just as the plane shuddered again, the world seemed to pause. The metallic smell of overheating circuits filled the cabin. The lights flickered dangerously. Outside, the sky was a serene blue, mocking the chaos inside. Emily took a deep breath, feeling a calm settle over her, a clarity born of preparation, fear, and instinct. She glanced at her mother one last time before standing, small but resolute. The passengers around her were screaming. Flight attendants were shouting. And up front, the pilots were battling to stabilize a plane that could kill them all in the next heartbeat. Emily Carter, 11 years old, stepped forward. And the first moments of heroism were about to begin. The metallic groan of the plane echoed through the cabin again, louder this time, reverberating in passengers' bones. The hum of the remaining engine stuttered, then roared unevenly, a mechanical heartbeat gone off rhythm. Drinks sloshed, trays rattled, and somewhere near the back a baby screamed, its wail slicing through the murmur of anxious voices. Passengers had begun to realize this wasn't a routine bump. A few tried to stay calm, forcing smiles for children or whispering reassurances, but the tremor in their own voices betrayed them. Faces turned pale, eyes wide, fingers clutching seatbelts, armrests, loved ones. The older man near the window muttered prayers he hadn't uttered since youth, closing his eyes tight against the noise, the fear, the unknown. Emily Carter's mother wrapped an arm around her, trembling. "It's going to be okay, Emily. Just stay calm." But Emily didn't reply. Her eyes scanned the cabin, taking in every micro-expression, every subtle reaction. She noted the tension in the flight attendant's shoulders, the way one teenage boy kept gripping his phone like a lifeline. She heard the whispered panic as a woman muttered to her husband, Are we going to die? Emily's pulse raced, but she wasn't scared. Not exactly. Her mind was already calculating. Every tremor, every vibration, every alarm was data. The plane's movements told a story, a narrative of failing hydraulics, of one engine gone silent, of a delicate equilibrium about to break. And she knew, because of the hours spent with her father, that the adults around her might not fully understand the danger. The plane jolted violently again, throwing a tray of drinks to the floor, shattering glasses and spraying coffee across the aisle. Screams erupted in a chorus of terror. Emily grabbed her mother's arm, not to cling for comfort but to steady herself. "It's okay," she whispered, though the words were meant more for herself than for her mother. Around her, chaos was mounting. Flight attendants struggled to maintain order, their voices rising above the shouts and cries. "Remain seated, secure your belts," one yelled, her tone strained and shaky. Bags shifted in the overhead bins, some falling to the aisle with a heavy thud. A teenager panicked, jumping to help retrieve a rolling suitcase, only to be thrown backward by another shutter. Panic was contagious. Fear had become a living entity, crawling through the aisles, wrapping around hearts like a vice. Emily watched it all with unflinching eyes. Most people had no idea what was happening, didn't understand the intricacies of flight, didn't know what a partial engine failure at cruising altitude could do. But she did. Her father's lessons were alive in her memory. How planes behaved when one engine went silent, the delicate balance required to maintain lift, the difference between a controlled descent and a catastrophic stall. And she noticed something alarming. The flight attendants, though skilled and experienced, were following protocol for turbulence, not engine failure. The signs she could read in her mind, the subtle deviations in tilt and airspeed, suggested that the plane could tip into a dangerous stall if not corrected soon. Most adults wouldn't see it yet, but Emily could. A mother screamed as her child was jolted against the seatbelt strap. The child's sobs pierced the tense air, adding to the cacophony of panic. Emily's gaze moved to the cockpit door. Through the narrow window she could just make out shadows, the pilots fighting controls, faces tense, hands gripping yokes and throttles. They were professionals. But the plane was a living creature now, wounded and unpredictable. One wrong move could send it spiraling. "Mom, they don't know," Emily said softly, almost to herself, though her mother heard the tremor in her voice. "They might make a mistake." Her mother's hand shook in response, fingers tightening around Emily's wrist. "Sweetheart, don't talk like that," she said, voice cracking. But Emily couldn't stop thinking. She had to act. The plane lurched again, more violently. Drinks spilled across knees, papers flew through the air. A man in business attire shouted in terror, "What's happening?" The noise was deafening now, a mix of shrieks, alarms, and the mechanical groan of the aircraft. Somewhere above, a warning light flashed red in the cockpit, visible to the observant eye through the narrow windows. Emily's stomach dropped. That light meant hydraulic failure in the left engine. The kind of failure her father had warned could turn a flight deadly in minutes. She noticed a flight attendant struggling to help an elderly passenger strap in properly. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hands shaking. Emily's mind ran faster than the chaos around her. She could see the potential errors forming, overcorrections, sudden yanks of the yoke, panic-induced miscalculations. And she knew they might miss one critical step, the one thing that would save or doom them all. A sudden shudder threw passengers forward. Phones tumbled from laps. A tray smashed to the floor. Oxygen masks remained still, but the air pressure had shifted, the cabin feeling suddenly heavier, oppressive. The panic was now tangible, almost tactile, wrapping around the passengers' throats like a cold hand. Emily's heart raced, but again, not with fear, with focus. The pilots' voices came over the intercom now, controlled but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain calm." Emily heard the professionalism, but she also heard the tension hiding beneath it. She knew the cockpit was a battlefield, the plane a wounded soldier, and every second now counted. A mother near the aisle gasped as her daughter clutched her arm. "We're going down, aren't we?" she whispered, eyes wide, voice trembling. Emily didn't answer. Words wouldn't help, not yet. She needed to assess, calculate, understand the next moves. The plane tilted sharply again, a hard roll to the right. Passengers were thrown into their seats, some hitting the overhead bins. Emily's stomach lurched, not with fear but with recognition of the mechanics. The plane was losing balance, and the next tilt could tip it into a stall if not corrected. She scanned the cabin quickly. Bags scattered across the aisle. Children cried. Flight attendants were shouting, trying to manage chaos they weren't trained for at this moment. Emily's eyes landed on a young attendant struggling to make her way to the cockpit intercom. She had to reach the pilots, had to relay the critical intervention that might save the aircraft, but she might not realize what exactly to say. Emily felt a strange calm descend over her amidst the chaos, the clarity born of preparation and instinct. This was her moment. She had learned the emergency procedures from her father. She knew the signs, the risks, the exact steps that could prevent disaster, and no one else seemed to understand it, not yet. The plane shuddered violently once more. Passengers screamed. Luggage tumbled. A mother whispered prayers over her child. The roar of the engine was uneven now, strained. Emily stood up slowly, feeling every eye on her turn in confusion and fear. She didn't hesitate. She moved toward the aisle, toward the flight attendant she had noticed struggling with the intercom. "Please," Emily said firmly, voice calm and commanding despite her small size. "You have to tell the captain. Now, don't overcorrect. The plane will stall." The attendant froze. Her hands trembled on the intercom, unsure if she had heard right. A child, an 11-year-old girl, was telling her how to fly a plane, but the look in Emily's eyes was unshakable. There was knowledge there. There was urgency. There was truth. The plane tilted again, violently, throwing a soda cart sideways. The aisle filled with scattered luggage. A passenger yelled, "Someone help!" But Emily's voice rose above it, clear and unwavering. "The plane will stall. Tell the captain now." The flight attendant's hand quivered over the intercom. She glanced at Emily again. The girl wasn't panicking. She wasn't screaming. She was instructing. And in that moment the adult realized the girl might know something vital. The plane lurched yet again, sharper this time, dipping slightly. Passengers gasped. Oxygen masks still hung unused. The metallic smell of machinery burning lightly drifted into the cabin. The panic in the cabin reached a fever pitch. Everyone's fate depended on what came next, on the next choice, the next action. Emily's small voice echoed in the corridor, "Tell them now." The flight attendant's finger hovered over the button. One press, one message, one moment that could change everything. And then the cabin fell into an almost surreal silence, the kind that comes just before disaster strikes or salvation arrives. Emily Carter had never considered herself a hero. Most children her age worried about school, video games, or the next soccer practice. But at this moment, seated in a trembling aluminum tube hurtling 35,000 feet above the Midwest, Emily's mind was wired differently. She was listening, watching, calculating. Her father had been the kind of man who saw life in gears and pulleys, in dials and numbers. Before he passed, he had spent countless nights teaching Emily about the inner workings of machines, about how airplanes responded to failure, about how a calm mind could save lives when panic threatened to overtake reason. He had taught her the theory behind stalls, hydraulic failures, engine malfunctions, and emergency checklists, an education most adults would never touch, let alone an 11-year-old girl. Now every lesson from her father surged into her consciousness like a torrent. The metallic bang, the shudder, the uneven hum of the surviving engine, Emily recognized it all. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't a minor malfunction. This was critical engine failure, and it was happening right now. The plane tilted sharply and a collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Emily's mother clutched her arm, shaking. I can't breathe," she whispered, her face pale. Emily's heart went out to her mother, but she didn't falter. Fear could wait. Lives couldn't. Emily remembered the simulations her father had made her run countless times. He had shown her videos of planes losing engines, the rapid descent, the rising panic, the final critical steps that could save, or end, everything. Most adults couldn't remember the order of steps under normal conditions, let alone under life-or-death pressure. Emily's mind, trained through repetition, could. Her gaze darted to the flight attendant struggling to reach the intercom. She saw the woman hesitate, torn between protocol and the chaos surrounding her. Emily's voice rose, firm and unwavering. "You have to tell the captain what's happening. They're about to overcorrect." The attendant froze, eyes wide. "A child, what are you saying?" "The plane will stall," Emily shouted louder now. "They don't know. They need to stabilize airspeed and adjust the pitch." The attendant's finger hovered over the intercom button. Something in Emily's tone, her certainty, her calm amidst panic, made the woman press it. The message crackled through the cockpit intercom. Emily's gaze sharpened. The pilots froze mid-action as her words echoed through the cabin. The co-pilot muttered under his breath, "Did a child just?" The captain's eyes narrowed, scanning the instruments, then back to the intercom. "Repeat," the captain barked, voice tight but professional. The attendant relayed Emily's instructions verbatim, and the captain stiffened. His eyes flicked to the dials, gauges, and altimeter. Then, slowly, recognition dawned. The girl's words matched the critical emergency protocol from a rarely used manual, the one procedure most pilots had only read once in their careers. Emily sat back slightly, watching as her instructions, unwittingly transmitted by an adult, made their way into the cockpit. Her hands trembled, not with fear but with adrenaline, her body alive with the knowledge that every second now counted. The plane lurched again, more violently than before. Oxygen masks had not yet deployed, but passengers were gripping each other, eyes wide with terror. Children screamed, babies cried. The roar of the malfunctioning engine was deafening, a harsh symphony of stress and danger. And yet, amid the chaos, Emily's mind remained methodical. She noted each tilt, each vibration, each sound. She could predict the plane's next movement almost instinctively, like a musician reading a score. The captain adjusted the yoke carefully, guided by Emily's instructions. The plane stabilized slightly, a small miracle in the midst of turmoil. Emily's eyes tracked the subtle changes in airspeed, the minor corrections of the wing flaps, the throttling adjustments of the remaining engine. She felt a strange sense of authority, though she was just a child, just a passenger, just a voice in a storm of panic. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her father, and she whispered his favorite phrase under her breath. "Observe first, act precisely, never panic." The words were more than advice, they were survival. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and felt the plane respond, almost like it recognized her determination. Passengers began to notice the slight change, though they couldn't understand why. The violent jerks lessened. The sudden dips in altitude softened. The cabin hummed with nervous energy. The difference was subtle but tangible. Emily's voice, carried through the intercom by the attendant, had guided the pilot's hands. She noticed small miracles everywhere in the cabin. A mother soothed her crying child. A teenager stopped panicking and gripped the seat in front with newfound determination. Flight attendants moved more efficiently, stabilizing the aisles. And above it all, the plane, wounded and groaning, responded. But the danger wasn't over. Emily knew that. One misstep, one overcorrection, one failure to follow procedure, and all of the progress could unravel in an instant. She could feel it, a subtle change in the engine's vibration, a flicker in the warning lights. It was a countdown she could read if she stayed sharp. She scanned the cabin again, noticing the smallest details. The elderly man near the window gripping his armrest with white knuckles. A young couple holding hands so tightly their knuckles were pale. The flight attendant struggling to maintain composure. Every face told a story of fear, hope, and survival. Every small action mattered. Emily's mother leaned close. "You shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, panic edging her voice. "I have to," Emily said simply. Her gaze returned to the cockpit. "They're listening, they need me. I can help." The captain's voice came again over the intercom, steady but tense. Stabilizing, adjusting, following procedure. Emily's heart raced. Each word confirmed that her knowledge had bridged the gap between life and death. She had taken a step beyond being a passenger. She had become a part of the flight crew, a silent guardian in the chaos. The plane tilted again, a sudden dip sending luggage sliding down the aisles. Screams erupted, but Emily remained focused. She noted the angle of descent, the speed, the slight yawing to the left. She understood the mechanics of what was happening before the pilots even verbalized it. She whispered the instructions again under her breath like a mantra. Maintain airspeed, reduce pitch, don't fight the yaw. The intercom crackled once more as the attendant relayed her words again. Emily felt a chill of anticipation. She knew that the next few moments would be critical. If the pilots miscalculated, if they overcorrected, if the plane tipped too far, the consequences would be catastrophic. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, imagining her father's calm voice guiding her hands. Then the plane lurched violently. The passengers screamed in unison. Emily's mother gripped her tightly, whispering frantic reassurances. Emily felt the surge of adrenaline, the raw edge of fear, but also a strange clarity. She knew what needed to be done, and she knew it could save lives. She opened her eyes. The cockpit lights flickered through the small window. The co-pilot's hands trembled slightly on the yoke. The captain's jaw was tight, eyes scanning instruments with a fury that spoke of sheer determination. Emily's words, carried by a frightened but obedient attendant, were guiding every motion. And yet, despite her knowledge and clarity, Emily couldn't help but feel the terrifying weight of what she had just done. An 11-year-old girl was now influencing the fate of 283 lives above the clouds. The plane steadied marginally. The immediate danger had not passed, but a thread of hope appeared, a fragile lifeline connecting the girl's knowledge, the flight attendant's courage, and the pilot's experience. Emily sat back slightly, though her mind raced. She could sense that this was only the beginning. One wrong move could still undo everything. 1 second of hesitation, one overcorrection, one misread gauge, and the serene blue sky outside would become a battlefield. Emily's eyes returned to the cockpit window. Her small hands clenched in anticipation, ready to repeat the instructions if necessary. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Every shudder of the plane was a warning. Every scream from the cabin, a reminder of what was at stake. The passengers had no idea what was happening. They saw chaos, fear, uncertainty. They didn't see Emily, the quiet, calm observer who had already begun to influence the outcome, who understood the mechanics of disaster in ways even seasoned professionals might miss. And as the plane continued its perilous glide through the sky, Emily knew one undeniable truth. This was her moment. She couldn't hesitate. She couldn't panic. She had to act. The silence before the next warning bell was almost unbearable. The next decision, the next action, would define whether they all lived or died. The plane groaned as it tilted sharply, a heavy, dangerous roll that sent drinks flying and trays rattling. Oxygen masks still hung untouched, dangling like a silent promise that catastrophe was imminent. Screams echoed down the aisles, a chorus of terror from the passengers who had no idea the worst was just beginning, or that salvation was now standing among them. Emily Carter, 11 years old, rose from her seat with purpose. She had unbuckled her seatbelt despite the chaos, her small frame moving with a determination that drew glances of confusion and disbelief from nearby passengers. A woman with wide, terrified eyes whispered, "She's crazy." But Emily didn't hear it. Her mind was a laser-focused engine of calculation and instinct, honed by years of watching, memorizing, and practicing what no child should ever need to know. The flight attendant she had noticed earlier struggled to move down the aisle, her uniform wrinkled, hands shaking as she tried to maintain control. Emily's voice rang out clearly, cutting through the cacophony. "You have to tell the captain," she shouted, urgency in every syllable. "Now, if you don't, the plane will stall." The attendant froze mid-step, eyes locking with Emily's. Panic painted her face, but Emily's gaze was steady, unyielding. It wasn't fear the girl radiated, it was knowledge. The kind of knowledge that demanded to be acted upon. I can't," the attendant stammered, her hand hovering over the intercom button. I mean he'll." "The captain will listen," Emily interrupted, her voice rising. "If you don't tell him, everyone is going to," she swallowed, refusing to say the word that hung like a shadow over the cabin. "Die, you have to tell him what's happening, right now." The attendant's finger trembled over the button, hesitation battling instinct. Emily could see it in her eyes. The adult world, trained in protocol, suddenly uncertain, paralyzed by chaos. But Emily didn't wait. She took a careful step closer, voice calm and precise now, carrying the authority of someone far beyond her years. "Tell him exactly this. Maintain airspeed, reduce pitch, don't fight the yaw, say it, the plane will stall if you don't. He has to hear it now." A flicker of understanding crossed the attendant's face, a recognition that this child knew something vital. And then, with a deep, shaky breath, she pressed the intercom button. Her voice carried Emily's words to the cockpit, repeating them verbatim. Inside, the pilots froze. The captain's jaw tightened, eyes scanning the instruments furiously. The co-pilot muttered under his breath, incredulous. Did a child just... Emily didn't look away. She watched, calculating every second, anticipating the plane's next movement. The lurching, the tilt, the groaning of metal, it all mattered. Every detail told her what the pilots might do next, and what she needed to communicate if the warnings weren't enough. The plane tilted violently again, throwing passengers sideways. A tray of coffee crashed to the floor, spilling hot liquid over someone's lap. Screams erupted. Emily's mother clutched her hand tightly, panic evident in her shaking fingers, but Emily didn't flinch. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, imagining the cockpit, the controls, the readings, and the one small intervention that could save them all. "Mom, I have to," Emily whispered almost to herself, though her mother could hear. "I have to help, I can't just sit here." The captain adjusted the controls, guided by Emily's instructions now filtering through the intercom. The plane stabilized slightly. The lurching lessened. A sliver of hope cut through the chaos, but Emily knew the danger was far from over. She noticed the subtle indicators only she could read, the slight unevenness in the left wing, the variation in engine pitch, the faint flicker of warning lights. The plane wasn't out of danger. It was alive, wounded, and every movement required delicate precision. Emily stepped closer to the flight attendant, lowering her voice so only she could hear. "Listen carefully. You have to repeat it exactly. Don't paraphrase. Don't add words. Just say, maintain airspeed, reduce pitch, don't fight the yaw. If they do anything else, we could lose control." The flight attendant nodded, a mix of fear and disbelief in her eyes. "A child telling me how to save a plane," she muttered, almost to herself. "This is insane." "Yes," Emily said, calm and resolute, "but it's true, do it." The plane shuddered again. Oxygen masks now dropped from the ceiling, dangling like silent witnesses to the battle unfolding. The cabin was chaos, passengers gripping each other, crying, praying, screaming, children wailing, the metallic smell of machinery faint but ominous. Yet amid all that, Emily moved with clarity, her small voice cutting through fear, a lighthouse guiding the crew in a storm. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice was tense but authoritative. "Copy, stabilizing, following procedure." Emily's heart raced. The plane had stabilized slightly, a miraculous but temporary relief. She knew the next moments would be even more critical. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently, tilting sharply again, throwing luggage down the aisles. A man shouted, "Brace! Brace!" Everyone slammed into their seatbelts, knuckles white, stomachs in their throats. Emily held her ground, focus absolute. She could feel the rhythm of the aircraft like a living heartbeat, each tremor telling her more than words could convey. She turned her attention back to the flight attendant. "Keep repeating it, don't stop. He has to follow exactly what I say. Airspeed, pitch, yaw." The attendant's hand shook, her finger pressing the button again. Emily's instructions flowed through the intercom like a lifeline. Calm, precise, urgent. Every word mattered. The pilots, for the first time in minutes, had a thread to follow through the chaos, a voice that cut through panic, fear, and adrenaline. Emily's mother watched, wide-eyed, fear mingled with awe. "I can't believe you're helping," she whispered. "I have to," Emily replied simply. Her eyes never left the aisle, never left the plane. She could feel the weight of every passenger's life resting on this moment, every heartbeat in the cabin, a reminder that time was running out. The plane groaned again. Alarms blared faintly, warning lights flickered, but the tilt lessened. The chaos hadn't ended, but a fragile control was returning. Emily's small voice had become a thread connecting passengers, flight attendants, and pilots, a lifeline in a high-altitude storm. She scanned the cabin once more. A young boy gripped his mother's arm, eyes wide with terror. An elderly woman whispered prayers she hadn't spoken in decades. Flight attendants moved with tense efficiency, stabilizing carts, calming passengers. Every second mattered. And through it all, Emily understood the truth. Knowledge alone wasn't enough. Timing, precision, clarity, these were the tools that could save them. She had the knowledge. Now she had to make sure it was applied perfectly. The plane tilted again, less violently this time. A faint cheer rose from the back, an instinctive relief from passengers who didn't fully understand why. Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the cockpit window. The co-pilot's hands trembled, the captain's jaw tightened. But for the first time there was a rhythm, a pattern forming. The plane was responding. Emily whispered again under her breath, repeating the instructions as a mantra. Maintain airspeed, reduce pitch, don't fight the yaw. The words were more than instructions, they were survival. The flight attendant relayed them once more over the intercom. The pilots adjusted. The plane leveled slightly. Passengers held their breaths. For a moment the cabin fell into an eerie, tense silence, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the faint creak of metal. Emily's eyes scanned every face, every detail. The danger wasn't over. The plane was still wounded. One miscalculation could undo everything. But for the first time, there was hope. And Emily Carter, 11 years old, had become the unlikely thread holding it all together. The next few minutes would define everything. The plane groaned, a wounded beast thrashing against the sky. Its single-functioning engine strained with every passing second, producing a low, uneven hum that vibrated through the cabin. The fuselage shuddered violently, and the tilted wings threw passengers into the arms of their seatbelts, screaming filling the aisles like a storm breaking through calm. Inside the cockpit, the captain's hands gripped the yoke until his knuckles whitened. His co-pilot's face was pale, sweat streaming down his temple as he fought to maintain control. Every gauge told a different story. Every warning light blinked with urgent insistence, and the subtle vibrations of the plane beneath their fingertips were impossible to ignore. Then the intercom crackled. Emily's voice, carried through the terrified attendant, pierced the tension like a lighthouse beam cutting through a storm. Maintain airspeed, reduce pitch, don't fight the yaw. The captain froze mid-movement, eyes scanning the instruments. For a heartbeat he hesitated. What were these words coming from a child? Then he checked the airspeed, the angle of attack, the tilt of the wings. The numbers confirmed it. They were at the critical edge of a stall, and the minor overcorrections he had instinctively made could have tipped the plane into disaster. The co-pilot swallowed hard. "She's right," he muttered under his breath. The captain's jaw clenched. Every second now counted. Outside, the sky was serene, the clouds painted in gold by the setting sun. It mocked the chaos inside, a perfect calm that offered no clues to the danger lurking just beneath the aluminum skin. The plane tilted again, hard, and alarm screamed as the metallic creature flexed its wounded wings. Emily sat in her seat, small hands clenched, her mind racing. She could see it in her mental simulation. If they overcorrected now, if they reacted instinctively to the tilt instead of following protocol, the plane could stall and there would be no recovery. She whispered again, almost as if speaking directly to the pilots. "Keep it steady. Don't fight it. Let it glide. Control the speed. You can do this." The attendant relayed the instructions again, voice shaky but obedient. Emily watched the cockpit through the small window, heart hammering. The pilots adjusted slightly, following the precise steps her father had drilled into her memory. Airspeed stabilized, pitch corrected, yaw normalized. It was a small victory, but a fragile one. Every second still mattered. The plane groaned again, and passengers screamed as luggage tumbled down the aisles. Emily's mother gripped her hand, panic still evident, but Emily didn't let her fear show. This was no longer just a flight. This was a battle for survival, and she had to be precise. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the cockpit, as though she could guide them herself. "Don't rush it," she whispered. "One step at a time. You have to follow the procedure exactly." Inside the cockpit, the captain's hands moved methodically, guided by Emily's words. He adjusted the throttles, easing the surviving engine, checking the instruments. The co-pilot manipulated the yoke, careful not to overcorrect, trusting the voice from the cabin despite his disbelief. Emily noticed a subtle change. The plane had stabilized, just enough to prevent a stall, but only temporarily. She could see the tension in the pilot's movements, the tight grip on controls, the strained coordination between them. They were professionals, yes, but they were doing something no training had prepared them for, listening to a child with precise knowledge of procedures. The plane lurched again, hard, a violent shudder that sent oxygen masks swinging, passengers screaming. Emily's stomach twisted, not with fear but recognition. She understood exactly how the plane would respond if the pilots made one wrong move. One sudden pitch, one overcompensation, one delayed adjustment. "Steady, steady, steady," she muttered under her breath. Her words were not loud enough for anyone but herself, but in that moment it was as if the plane could feel her focus, could respond to the clarity in her mind. A flight attendant moved past her, stabilizing the aisle, shouting instructions to terrified passengers. Emily turned to her. "Keep relaying it, exactly as I say. Don't change anything. They have to follow it exactly." The attendant nodded, gripping the intercom button tightly. The words flowed again, precise and urgent. The pilots adjusted, and for a moment the plane glided with terrifying grace, a wounded bird holding itself in the sky by sheer willpower. Emily's heart pounded, adrenaline sharp in her veins. She had never felt so alive and so responsible. She glanced around the cabin, noticing faces etched with fear, children gripping parents, adults whispering prayers. None of them knew the role she was playing in this ballet of life and death. None of them understood that the tiny voice from the back of the plane was literally guiding the hands of those who could save them. The plane tilted again dangerously, and Emily's stomach lurched with it. The wings flexed, metal groaning, the vibration of the engine uneven. She could see it all in her mind, the trajectory, the potential consequences, the narrow margin between survival and catastrophe. "Hold the controls steady," she whispered fiercely. "Do not overcorrect. You can do this." The co-pilot adjusted minutely, and the plane responded, righting itself just enough. The passengers screamed, cried, and gasped as they felt the violent shifts in motion. Emily remained focused, her eyes fixed on the cockpit, calculating the next critical adjustments. Minutes passed, or what felt like hours. Every second was a test of nerves, skill, and instinct. Emily's voice continued to guide the attendant, and through the crackling intercom, her words reached the cockpit, shaping the hands of the pilots, stabilizing the plane against the ever-present threat of a fatal stall. A small cheer erupted from a few passengers who sensed the slight steadiness, though they had no idea why. The plane's violent jerks had lessened. The tilt had corrected slightly. Hope, fragile and tenuous, began to bloom in the cabin. But Emily knew it was temporary. The plane was still operating with one engine, limited hydraulics, and critical vulnerability. Every adjustment had to be perfect, every command precise. One misstep now could undo the stabilization she had helped initiate. She whispered again, her voice almost a chant now. "Maintain airspeed, reduce pitch, don't fight the yaw, steady, steady, steady." The cockpit responded, the plane gliding, wobbling slightly, but holding. Emily's heart raced. The next few moments would decide if they could survive long enough to reach an airport. Then a sudden jolt. A warning light flashed red in the cockpit. Sparks of panic rippled through the cabin. Emily's mind raced. She could see what was happening in microseconds. The engine was straining further, the airspeed fluctuating, the plane threatening to tip. Now," she yelled, urgency slicing through the chaos. "Adjust the throttles gently, do not overcorrect." The cockpit responded. Slowly, carefully, the plane steadied. For the first time in minutes, the violent rocking lessened significantly. The passengers were thrown forward once more, then stabilized, gripping their seats in disbelief. The plane groaned, alive and injured but still airborne. Emily sank slightly into her seat, her body trembling with adrenaline. She looked around at the passengers, the flight attendants, the terrified faces, and felt a strange mixture of awe and responsibility. She had done this. She had guided the hands of professionals, steadied a plane, and saved lives, though none of them knew it yet. Her mother held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Emily, I don't know how," she whispered, voice broken with relief and fear. Emily shook her head, trying to steady herself. "We're not out of danger yet," she said, her voice calm, precise. "The plane is stable for now, but we have to keep it that way. One wrong move and it could all go wrong." The pilots, unaware of the full extent of her involvement, continued their careful adjustments. But Emily knew. She had seen the difference her instructions had made. She had become a silent force of guidance in a situation no one had ever prepared for, a child with knowledge that could prevent disaster. The cabin remained tense. Passengers whispered prayers, clung to loved ones, and watched in awe as the wounded plane glided through the sky, slowly stabilizing. Emily sat back slightly, exhausted but focused, knowing that while this moment had been survived, the real test, the landing, was yet to come. And in that suspended moment above the clouds, a single truth was clear. Sometimes, the difference between life and death is a voice no one expects to hear. The first glimmer of the airport appeared far below, a patchwork of lights glowing dimly against the darkening landscape. From 35,000 feet, it looked calm, orderly, almost impossible to reconcile with the chaos inside Flight 417. The plane's wounded engine whined, the vibrations reverberating through the cabin, reminding every passenger that survival was still a fragile thread. Emily Carter's eyes were wide, scanning the cabin. Faces were pale, knuckles white around seatbelts, children clinging desperately to parents, adults whispering prayers they hadn't spoken in decades. Oxygen masks still dangled, some untouched, as if fate itself had held them suspended until the right moment. Emily's small hands were clenched in her lap, trembling, not with fear but with adrenaline and concentration. The plane lurched violently, pitching slightly to the left. The remaining engine whined, straining under the pressure of descent. The co-pilot swore under his breath, adjusting the yoke with precise micro-movements. The captain's jaw was tight, eyes scanning dials, gauges, altimeters. Both men had decades of experience, yet now they were guided by the voice of an 11-year-old girl. Emily whispered instructions to the flight attendant who had become her conduit. "Maintain airspeed. Reduce pitch, small adjustments, steady, steady." Her words were calm, precise, unwavering, even as the plane threatened to tip again. The intercom crackled. The co-pilot's voice was tense but measured. Copy. Adjusting airspeed, pitch stable. Emily exhaled sharply. The plane responded, tilting just enough to glide rather than plummet. The passengers were thrown forward, then back into their seats, groaning and crying. An elderly woman gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles were white. "We're going to," she whispered, voice trailing into a prayer. Emily's mother clutched her daughter, shaking. Yet Emily's eyes were fixed on the aisle and the cockpit, mentally running simulations she had practiced hundreds of times with her father. "Mom, it's okay," Emily whispered, though her voice held authority far beyond her age. "We can do this. I can help, just trust me." The captain made another adjustment, guided by her instructions, and for the first time since the emergency began, the plane felt marginally under control. Not safe. Nothing was safe yet, but survivable. Emily's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the plane, each vibration a warning and a guide. She could feel the weight of 283 lives pressed into her small shoulders, and yet her resolve was unshakable. The runway came into clearer view. Lights stretched across the tarmac, glimmering like a lifeline. Emily's eyes narrowed, focusing on the subtle cues, the angle of descent, the rate of fall, the shifting winds that could make the difference between a smooth landing and catastrophe. She noticed the subtle sway of the plane, the slight drift caused by crosswinds. Her mind raced, calculating adjustments in microseconds. "Crosswind correction now," she whispered sharply, almost inaudibly. The flight attendant relayed the instruction over the intercom. The co-pilot adjusted the yoke, wings tilting slightly, rudder correcting just enough. The plane stabilized, no small feat given the weakened engine and limited hydraulics. Passengers felt a momentary relief, though none could articulate why. They could only feel the subtle steadiness, the shift from uncontrollable chaos to fragile control. Emily's stomach twisted. The plane was descending too fast. The angle of approach was steep and the landing gear had yet to deploy. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her thoughts clear. Every detail mattered now. One misjudged movement, one delayed action, one overcorrection, and Flight 417 could end in disaster on the asphalt below. "Steady, steady, throttle gently, no sudden moves," she muttered under her breath, voice calm but urgent. She glanced at her mother, who could only watch, terror and awe etched across her face. Passengers gripped their seats, eyes wide, bracing for impact. The plane shuddered again. A soda can rolled down the aisle, clanging against a fallen tray. Oxygen masks swung, some tangled in the chaos. Screams erupted from every row. Emily ignored it all, her mind fixed on the cockpit. The co-pilot spoke over the intercom, tension lacing his words. "Gear not deployed, stabilizing for approach, runway in sight." Emily's eyes narrowed at the flicker of red on the instrument panel. The landing gear, if delayed any further, could compromise the touchdown. She leaned forward, small but determined. "Now, lower the landing gear, slow the descent slightly." The flight attendant relayed the instructions. The captain's hands moved quickly, deploying the landing gear. Sparks of friction hissed faintly as the wheels emerged, trembling under the strain. The plane's descent slowed slightly, but the approach was still perilous. Emily's stomach clenched. They were running out of runway, out of time, out of room for error. The passengers were pressed into their seats, children crying, adults gripping tightly, bracing for impact. A man whispered frantic prayers. A mother whispered lullabies to her frightened child. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and fear, the metallic tang of machinery burning lightly in the air. Emily's focus never wavered. She calculated the final adjustments: airspeed, pitch, crosswind, throttle. Every second mattered. Every breath mattered. Every word she whispered could tip the balance between life and death. The plane lurched again, dangerously. Emily's mother gasped, holding her daughter tighter. "Emily, please." "Steady," Emily whispered, voice almost a command. "We can do this. We have to do this." The co-pilot adjusted the controls again, following her guidance relayed through the attendant. The plane stabilized slightly, wings level. The runway grew larger in their view, a ribbon of light against darkness. Emily's eyes flitted to the instruments, tracking the approach, the alignment, the speed. She saw the slightest deviation, calculated the correction, and whispered it once more. Throttle gently, maintain glide, do not overcorrect. The plane responded. The violent shaking lessened. Passengers felt the difference, though they could not see the subtle guidance behind it. They clutched each other, eyes wide, hearts hammering. The plane shuddered, then leveled. Emily's heartbeat synchronized with the plane's rhythm. Every movement mattered. Every decision could tip the outcome. The landing gear touched the runway, hard, loud, a violent impact that threw passengers forward in their seats. The tires screeched against asphalt, friction and heat producing sparks that danced along the tarmac. A collective scream of relief and terror filled the cabin. The plane skidded slightly but remained intact, the pilots battling to maintain control as the damaged aircraft raced down the runway. Emily clutched her mother's hand, tears streaming, adrenaline surging. "Keep it steady, almost there," she whispered, voice trembling with the tension of the final seconds. The plane slowed gradually, friction and careful adjustments bringing it to a stop. Smoke rose faintly from the tires, alarms still blaring in the cabin, but they were alive. Every single passenger, 283 lives, had survived. A stunned silence followed. Passengers stared around at each other, disbelief etched into every face. Bobbies cried softly, adults sobbed quietly, and flight attendants slumped, exhausted. Emily's mother held her, shaking, whispering words of awe and fear. Emily sank into her seat, trembling, trying to comprehend what had just happened. She had guided the hands of professionals, steadied a plane, and helped prevent catastrophe. And yet, the cabin remained tense, every survivor aware that they had come terrifyingly close to disaster. The first emergency crews arrived, lights flashing, doors opening. Passengers were ushered out onto the tarmac, falling to their knees, hugging loved ones, sobbing, praying. And through it all, Emily sat in her mother's arms, small and trembling, still processing the weight of what she had done. The captain, stepping out of the cockpit, looked at the passengers, then at the flight attendant. He frowned, noticing the girl sitting quietly, calm now, eyes wide but steady. Something about her aura, her focus, her presence caught his attention. And somewhere deep inside, he realized that without her, Flight 417 might not have landed alive. Emily's small hand squeezed her mother. She whispered softly, "We did it, we're alive." The reality sank in slowly, like the weight of the clouds lifting after a storm. They were alive, all 283 of them. But Emily knew survival had not been a miracle, not luck. It had been precision, knowledge, timing, courage, and one small voice speaking up when no one else could. Above the runway, lights flashing and smoke curling from the tires, the truth was clear. Sometimes it's the smallest person in the room who can hold the fate of hundreds in her hands. And Emily Carter had just done exactly that. The plane's wheels screeched against the asphalt, friction and heat sending up sparks that glittered in the dim floodlights of the emergency runway. The landing gear groaned under the sudden, uneven pressure, threatening to buckle, but somehow held. The aircraft shuddered violently with every inch it moved along the tarmac, dragging its damaged wing through the last invisible resistance of gravity and momentum. Inside, passengers were hurled forward, slamming into seatbelts and armrests. Glasses shattered, luggage tumbled from overhead bins, and cries of terror rang out across the cabin. Some passengers bit their hands, trying not to scream. Others clung desperately to loved ones, praying, shaking, weeping. It was chaos, but it was also survival. The thin, fragile line between life and death now stretched out beneath their feet. Emily Carter's small body jolted forward, but her hands clutched her mother's tightly. Her mind was still alive, still racing, even as adrenaline began to ebb and leave behind exhaustion so deep it threatened to collapse her. Her eyes flicked to the cockpit, where she could see the captain and co-pilot, tense and pale, hands still shaking on the controls. The plane skidded, veering slightly as the left wing scraped against a runway light, sparks cascading like fireflies in the darkness. The roar of the engine and friction was deafening, metal groaning under the strain. Every passenger's heart raced, every muscle tensed for the possibility of disaster. Emily felt it too, a sickening knowledge that this wasn't over. The runway wasn't long enough for error. One slip, 1 second too slow, and the outcome could still be catastrophic. The captain adjusted the yoke carefully, coaxing the aircraft forward. The co-pilot manipulated the brakes, easing the plane's momentum gradually. The emergency lights flickered through the cabin, painting faces in harsh reds and oranges. Sweat streamed down Emily's mother's face as she whispered over and over, "We're going to be okay, we're going to be okay." Emily's focus, however, was unwavering. She could sense every shift, every tremor, every subtle cue of the aircraft struggling to stabilize. Her father's voice, long gone but alive in her memory, guided her. Observe first, act precisely, never panic. She whispered to the flight attendant next to her, who had become her voice into the cockpit. Keep guiding them. Small adjustments, do not rush, steady, steady. The intercom crackled again. The captain's voice, strained and tight, came through. Steady, almost there, holding the line. Emily's chest tightened. Almost there. She understood fully that almost was a dangerous word. Too much could go wrong in a heartbeat. Outside, emergency crews waited, lights flashing, trucks and ambulances poised to intervene if the landing failed. But for the moment, the only thing keeping the plane in motion was the pilots, skill and Emily's guidance relayed through the trembling flight attendant. The plane groaned as it continued its skid down the runway. Sparks flew from the tires and smoke began curling along the tarmac. Passengers braced themselves against their seatbelts, eyes wide, knuckles white. Some whispered final prayers. Others wept quietly, unable to process the chaos that had just unfolded around them. Emily could feel the vibrations through the metal, the tension of every system holding, the fragile balance that separated survival from disaster. She whispered again, softly, "Steady, throttle, glide, you can do this." The aircraft lurched, then stabilized slightly. The captain adjusted the yoke, coaxing it gently, the co-pilot working the rudder and brakes with meticulous precision. The plane's forward momentum slowed gradually, tires screeching, sparks scattering, the wounded bird limping toward safety. In the cabin, passengers began to notice a small shift. The violent jerking lessened, and a sense of cautious hope rippled through the rows. A woman whispered, "I think we're going to make it." A teenager sobbed into his mother's shoulder. Children clung tightly to parents, their crying muffled by relief and lingering fear. Emily's mother held her close, trembling. You saved us," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how, but you did." Emily shook her head, her eyes still on the cockpit. "We're not done yet," she said softly. "The plane has to stop completely. We can't celebrate until it does." The remaining length of runway passed under the plane's tires. The sparks began to lessen. The screech of metal on asphalt softened as friction slowed the aircraft. Emergency lights reflected off the fuselage, painting red and gold streaks along the windows. The plane shuddered one final time, a long, groaning vibration through the fuselage. Then, miracle or calculation, it was hard to tell, the aircraft came to a full stop. Silence descended almost immediately, broken only by ragged breaths, whispered prayers, and the faint hiss of the engines cooling. Passengers remained frozen in disbelief. Some sat in their seats, still gripping armrests. Others turned to embrace loved ones, crying openly. A mother held her child so tightly she seemed afraid to breathe. An elderly man wept quietly, staring at the ceiling as if he had never believed he would see another sunrise. Emily sank back into her seat, trembling, exhausted beyond measure. Her small body shook with adrenaline and relief, tears streaking down her cheeks. She had done it. She had guided a plane carrying 283 lives to safety, and yet in her heart she knew the moment was only beginning. Flight attendants moved quickly now, checking passengers, ensuring no one was injured. A few minor scrapes, bruises, and shock miracles, considering the chaos of the landing. Emily's small voice guided them still, calm and precise. Check everyone, don't panic, move carefully. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his face pale, jaw tight, exhaustion etched into every line. He glanced at the cabin, at passengers and crew, at the child who had somehow become their guardian angel. His eyes met Emily's through the aisle, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. He opened his mouth, started to speak, then hesitated. The disbelief was evident in his eyes. This girl, this child, had influenced the outcome of a high-altitude, near-catastrophic emergency landing. His entire career, every protocol he had memorized had not prepared him for this. Yet somehow, she had made the difference. Emily's mother wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tight. "You saved us," she whispered, voice trembling. I can't believe it, you actually saved us." Emily shook her head again, exhaustion overcoming adrenaline. "We all did," she murmured. "The captain, the co-pilot, the attendants, everyone, but we had to make it this far first." Outside, emergency crews approached, floodlights illuminating the plane's battered fuselage. Sparks still rose faintly from the tires, smoke curling, but the danger had passed. Slowly, one by one, passengers began to emerge from their seats, embracing, crying, thanking the crew, and unbeknownst to most, the small girl who had guided them through the impossible. Emily remained seated for a moment, staring out the window at the glowing runway lights. She felt the weight of everything she had done settle upon her shoulders. 11 years old, yet she had navigated a storm of fear, chaos, and mechanical failure to ensure survival. The reality of it pressed in slowly, like the first warmth of sunlight after a long night. She had saved 283 lives, and while the world outside the cabin might never know the full story, inside, the miracle of their survival was undeniable. A flight attendant knelt beside her, voice trembling. "Emily, I don't know how to thank you. You saved all of us." Emily's small hand squeezed the attendant. "Just stay calm, help everyone out, that's all that matters." The captain came forward finally, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. He took a deep breath. "Young lady, I don't know your name yet, but you were incredible, absolutely incredible." Emily swallowed, still trembling. "I just remembered what my dad taught me, I just helped." The captain shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "Helped, you saved us." In that moment, the plane's cabin, still trembling from its dramatic landing, filled with a collective sense of awe. Passengers whispered thanks, cried quietly, and looked around at each other in disbelief. They had survived the impossible. And in a small corner of that cabin, the person who had made it possible sat quietly, exhausted, trembling, yet full of an undeniable, quiet strength. Emily Carter, 11 years old, had just done the unthinkable. She had saved 283 lives. And the world, though it would not yet know her name, would never forget the courage of the girl who refused to panic. The roar of emergency vehicles and the hum of bright floodlights surrounded Flight 417, but inside the cabin, a quiet calm was beginning to settle. Passengers were still trembling, still processing the near-impossible events that had just unfolded. Yet the terror that had gripped them at 35,000 feet was slowly giving way to relief, awe, and the overwhelming sense of survival. Emily Carter sat in her mother's lap, knees drawn up, small hands gripping tightly as if holding on would prevent the world from spinning out of control. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair disheveled, but her eyes were wide and alert. Even now, after the crash landing that had spared all 283 lives, she could not stop analyzing, cannot stop thinking. Every detail of the plane, every shift in velocity, every movement of the pilots, her mind replayed it all in relentless precision. Her mother wrapped her arms around her, tears streaking down her face. "Emily, my God, my brave, brave girl," she whispered. You saved everyone. Do you understand? Everyone." Emily shook her head, blinking back tears. I just remembered what Dad taught me. I just stayed calm and tried to help." Her father's memory was still vivid in her mind, a steady presence guiding her through the chaos. "Observe first. Act precisely. Never panic." Those words had become more than lessons. They were her shield, her compass, her lifeline. Outside, emergency crews were ushering passengers down the emergency slides, lights flashing across the tarmac, engines cooling, smoke curling from the tires of the plane. The wind carried the scent of burned rubber, jet fuel, and adrenaline, a potent reminder of how close they had come to disaster. People were hugging, crying, some laughing through their tears, disbelief etched on every face. They had survived. Miraculously, impossibly, they had survived. News crews had arrived, floodlights illuminating the plane, cameras capturing the aftermath. The story would soon go viral, not yet, but inevitably. But inside the cabin, none of that mattered. What mattered was the human connection, the raw emotion, the recognition that life had been preserved against impossible odds. The flight attendants moved methodically, checking passengers, offering blankets, water, comfort. One knelt beside Emily, gently brushing her hair from her eyes. "Young lady, you were amazing," she said, voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved everyone, every single person on this plane." Emily swallowed, shaking her head again. "I just helped them, guide them. They did everything else." But the truth was undeniable. Her calm, precise instructions, relayed through the flight attendant to the captain and co-pilot, had prevented disaster. Without her, the plane could have stalled, veered off the runway, or worse. 283 lives had been preserved by the knowledge and courage of an 11-year-old. The passengers were being guided to buses that would take them to the airport terminal. Emily's mother helped her stand, holding her hand tightly. Everywhere they walked, people glanced at her, whispers rippling through the crowd. That child helped land the plane." Some approached her, trembling, eyes wide. You saved us," an older man said, voice breaking. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Emily nodded quietly, unsure how to respond. She had never imagined herself a hero. She had just acted. But the reactions of those around her were overwhelming, a mixture of gratitude, awe, and disbelief. Inside the terminal, survivors sat on benches, still wrapped in blankets, still shaking. Some talked quietly to loved ones, some stared into space, replaying the terrifying moments in their minds. Emily and her mother were seated, holding hands, trying to calm their racing hearts. A firefighter approached them, kneeling to meet Emily's eyes. "Young lady, I've seen a lot in my career, but what you did today, that's beyond extraordinary. You saved lives. You have to understand that." Emily's lips trembled. I just did what I had to." "You did more than that," he said, smiling warmly. "You guided people through what no one has ever trained for. You were calm when no one else could be. You were a hero." Emily's mother hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "My sweet girl, you are our hero. Don't ever doubt it." Across the terminal, news crews had begun to arrive, eager to capture the miraculous story. Reporters whispered, cameras flashed, and soon the story of an 11-year-old girl who had helped land a plane carrying 283 people would spread across the nation. But for Emily, all that mattered was the faces around her. The passengers she had indirectly guided, the crew who had acted on her instructions, and the knowledge that she had made the difference. She thought of her father again, imagining his calm smile, the pride he would have felt. "You did it, Emily. You kept everyone alive." She let herself breathe the first deep breath of relief she had taken since the engine had failed at 35,000 feet. In the days that followed, Flight 417 became the center of a national story. News outlets called her the Miracle Girl, the youngest hero in aviation history, and the child who saved 283 lives. Interviews, photographs, and video clips showed her small figure holding her mother's hand, eyes wide with awe at the attention, cheeks flushed from adrenaline and exhaustion. Yet Emily remained humble, quiet, almost shy in the spotlight. She credited her father's lessons, the pilot's skill, and the flight attendant's courage. "I just helped guide them," she would say repeatedly. "They did the real work." But the world understood the truth. Without her, Flight 417 might not have landed safely. The pilots themselves, when interviewed, nodded gravely. Her instructions, they were precise, critical, and timely. Without them, we would have faced disaster. And Emily, finally understanding the magnitude of what had happened, allowed herself to feel something that had been impossible at 35,000 feet: pride. Quiet, deep, but unmistakable. She had acted with courage beyond her years, remained calm in the face of terror, and saved lives. Lives that would forever carry a piece of her bravery with them. The passengers, too, began to process the miracle. Families reunited, tears mingling with laughter, whispered thank yous and embraces that would never be forgotten. Among them, Emily's presence was felt, though few realized the full extent of her role. She was a quiet hero, small in stature, enormous in impact. Weeks later, awards were presented, ceremonies held, and Emily, now nationally recognized, stood quietly with her mother by her side. She accepted accolades with modesty, always redirecting praise to her father, the pilots, and the crew. And yet, in private moments, she allowed herself to reflect on what she had done. At night, she would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events in her mind. She could still see the tilting plane, hear the engines groan, feel the adrenaline rush through her veins. And she would whisper a quiet thanks to the universe, to her father, and to herself. "We survived. We all survived." Emily Carter's life would never be the same. Her courage and knowledge had carried her, and 283 others through the unthinkable. The world would call her a hero, a miracle, a prodigy. But for Emily, the story was simple. She had remembered her father's lessons, stayed calm, acted precisely, and refused to panic. And that, she knew, had made all the difference. The plane, once a vessel of terror, now rested silently on the tarmac. Emergency crews filed past, checking systems, assessing damage. Inside, passengers slowly disembarked, each carrying the memory of a day that had begun like any other, only to become a story of courage, focus, and survival beyond imagination. Emily walked down the aisle with her mother, small feet carrying the weight of a hero's story. She glanced once more at the cockpit, the place where knowledge, calm, and courage had collided to save lives, and she smiled faintly, exhausted but proud, knowing she had done the impossible. She had saved 283 lives. And in the hearts of those passengers, and in the pages of history that would record the story, Emily Carter would live forever, not just as a girl who survived, but as the child who dared to act, dared to speak, and dared to save the lives of hundreds when the world held its breath.
Ah, ok, stupido è. No, stupido è chi lo stupido fa, intendi? Dipende dalle circostanze. In che senso dipende dalle circostanze, secondo te? Ci sono vari tipi di stupido?
Ah, you're alive! Great. Yeah, just getting a test ready for you, obviously. Who else would I be doing it for? No one?
Chi lo fa lo è, quello senza
let's
dubbio. Dipende.
see here. Exit, exit,
Dipende. Io in stream
exit.
faccio lo stupido, però non è che lo sono. O meno, non mi definirei stupido perché in stream lo faccio. Potrei essere stupido per qualcos'altro. Momento l'urco finito. Ah, c'eri, cazzeggiato un po' su TikTok e lamentandomi per le notizie del D. Vai, sparami le notizie.
I'll be honest, after you told me to turn that beam off, I thought I had lost you. Went poking around for other test subjects, no luck there. Everyone's
Sono l'ultimo.
Oh, I did find something though, reminds me. I've got a big surprise for you two.
C'è una sorpresa! Che cosa? Non mi dire che è la torta perché impazzisco, è Pregno di Troia. C'è stupido alla L o stupido alla Paperino, dipende dai punti di vista. Paperino non è stupido. Lo stato emotivo, recitazionale, recitazione, cervello compromesso, baldanza, troppa sicurezza. Però una persona che fa baldanza, cioè tu intendi